speak about the alliance and combating the alliance between Wokeists and Islamists. Um, and before I get into the three panelists here, I'll just tell you one of the reasons I ended up here. I was interviewed by Yaz. She knows about my story. In a little background, what the Wokeists and the Islamists bring together for me are actually two of the main areas that I've studied in the past. When I was a student, while I was at Harvard, I did a lot of studies on the medieval political philosophy, which included, of course, Farabi, Averroes, Avicenna, the main Falasifa, and the battle between the Mutazilites and the Asharites. So that was my background there. And I also did a lot of continental philosophy, which includes the critical theorists, the postmodernists, the post-structuralists, including people like Heideggerian-influenced Ari Shariati, who was a major intellectual figure for the Islamic Revolution in Iran, as well as Alexander Dugin, who's an advisor to Putin. So those are the people I've studied. So I have some intellectual background in both these camps. And in 2009, because of that, I've written a number of academic articles. But in 2009, I wrote a book review. And the book was written by a very well-known historian of the contemporary Middle East, Ephraim Karsh, professor at London King's College and at Bar-Ilan University in Tel Aviv. And his book was about Islamic imperialism and the history of Islam as primarily an imperial religion in terms of its political expression, mostly through the successions of the caliphate that, of course, finally came to an end in 1924 when Ataturk ended the caliphate. Now, when I wrote that very obscure book review, not too many people read it, probably about 10 at most. There was no comment on it. But down the road a little bit, I had become a lawyer. I was practicing in areas of human rights and professional regulation. I gained an expertise and was appointed as an adjunct lecturer in medicine at the University of Calgary because I have an expertise in secondary harm caused by unfair or inappropriate complaints processes following an adverse medical event. So I ended up on the Alberta Human Rights Commission. I was there for 3 years as a part-time commissioner, writing decisions. I ended up writing, I was the most productive of 18 members, I think it was. And so in 2022, I ended up being appointed as the chief of the Alberta Human Rights Commission. And within a month and a half, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, working with the left in Alberta, which meant the New Democratic Party, which is our social democratic party there, decided to attack me for that one book review. The only thing I'd ever written actually on Islam, but they declared my book review to be Islamophobic, racist, and hate speech. Now, since that's happened, numerous academics have come to my defense, including the author of the book himself, Ephraim Karsh, who expressed his shock that I would be terminated over writing a book review, which he said was no different than any other book review on the subject. So I have had an experience, and as I said, it was the left, or what we would call now the woke left, who came after me. In the New Democratic Party, there were some bloggers who did as well. And of course, the National Council of Canadian Muslims had a different name not too long ago, CARE Canada. Mm-hmm. So they changed that name. They had some issues with the Stephen Harper Conservative government. They did go after him at one point. But I had never heard of the NCCM until I was attacked by them. And this just showed to me how quickly they were advancing in Canada and the patterns that they used. So before we get into all that, though, what I want to do and talk with the panel here is about their experiences with Islamists in each of their own countries. They each come from a different country. And what I'd like to hear is what your experiences have been, history of Islamists, where this idea came from, how it intersects with the sort of woke left As we said, Daniel brought this up, we need to talk about, I think, the woke left as well, because it was a conjunction of these two forces that brought me down. And one thing I would point out, and they don't care, it was a personal attack, but these were people I actually knew. My partner had worked for the leader of the New Democratic Party for 4 years, directly with her. But that didn't stop them from attacking me. That's how vicious they were. So you have to understand, I think, that element of the nasty, the personal, that the Wokeists and the Islamists use. But let's start off now with Dalia, there on the end. Dalia, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experiences in coming from Egypt and your thoughts on the history of Islamists.
Yeah, thank you, Colin, and I'm really happy to be with all of you here today. Thank you for the invitation and for the discussion, which I'm sure is not an easy one. And I should also applaud you for your bravery in face of what you were facing in your country with those who take muse in using Islamophobia as a weapon against anyone they reject. And unfortunately, ironically, this was used against me too. Mm-hmm. They accused me, despite being a Muslim, of being Islamophobic. I come from Egypt, the country where the most dangerous political Islamist organization started, the Muslim Brotherhood. And I call it the most dangerous, although all the time they claim that they are more moderate than the Salafists or Sunni groups, Sunni extremist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS and so, but they are the most dangerous because their thought, their ideology was the basis upon which all these extremist groups was built. So, for example, you would be surprised to know that, or perhaps you know, that people like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and Osama bin Laden started their life in their youth as members of the Muslim Brotherhood, adopting this same ideology that for years and years, for almost a century, its main goal was to establish or re-establish an Islamic caliphate under which all the people will be governed by Islamic Sharia. And by all the people, I'm not only speaking about the Arabs, not only speaking about the Muslims, but they only had very big ambitions about changing Western societies like the United States. One of their famous documents about their future plans in the United States and in the West in general is sabotaging America from within, sabotaging the United States from within so they can establish, end this concept of nation state and democratization and establish their own state. As someone who always believed in democracy and fought for democracy in my country, I participated in the Arab Spring, and I'm proud to say that I was one of the leaders of the Arab Spring in Egypt, Arab Spring Revolution in Egypt that brought down the dictatorship of Mubarak. I saw the threat of the Muslim Brotherhood very early. Not only from the moment they hijacked our revolution in 2011 and claimed that it is their revolution and they are the ones who are leading it, because sadly at that time we were so naive. We were so young and naive, and they were the only organized group on the ground that can really make a political challenge to the military power in Egypt. So they hijacked our revolution very easily, but even before that, I saw their threat coming because of the influence they had at Egyptian universities using the same rhetoric, the same narrative that is now used in American universities and Canadian universities and the universities in the West, which is the so-called Palestinian cause. It's very similar scenes to what we are seeing here now, people protesting in the name. They claim that they are sympathetic with the Palestinians, they are sympathetic with the innocent civilians, with the humanitarian situation, which I'm sure all of us agree with that. Like, all of us don't want to see people suffering from war. But they use that as a cover to their anti-Semitic agenda that is mainly focusing on eliminating Israel and eliminating every voice that supports the existence of Israel in the Middle East or the integration of Israel in the Middle East as actually a historical part of the Middle East. So using this narrative, they did not only dominate the Egyptian universities at that time. I'm speaking specifically in the period after the second intifada, they call it in early 2000s. It was the time when I was an undergraduate student. And actually, I was one of those who were fooled by their rhetoric, by their narrative. Day and night, we're watching footage on Al Jazeera TV. We feel very bad. They all the time in our universities like promote things like we have to sympathize with our Muslim, not, like our Muslim brothers and sisters in Palestine against the bad Jewish people who are killing them as if the Jewish people or Israel just decide to wake up one day and kill. It was even said in our media actually that Israel is purposefully killing the Palestinians because their number is multiplying, and thus they want to make sure that their number will not outnumber the number of the Jewish people in Israel. So I was one of the students, like so many students here in American universities, that was fooled by this narrative. Until later on, I learned the truth. I learned about what really Israel is, why it is here, and I learned about the danger of those who are hiding under these humanitarian causes and nice words to support Hamas. And since then, I've taken on myself the mission to fight against Hamas and against the Muslim Brotherhood. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I was successful at times. I always received death threats from them, and this is the story of my life. It's mainly fighting against the Muslim Brotherhood and receiving their backlashes. Until recently, things reached a limit that was very scary for me. Very scary not only on a personal level, but also on the collective level when the October 7 massacre happened. Before October 7, there was a sense in the region that we are finally over Islamists and over the power of, or the influence of Islamists on the general public. People started to speak about Israel in a positive light, speak about reconciliations between different, ideologically different countries in the region, normalization with Israel. So everything was really heading in the right direction. Until October 7 happened, Hamas gave a momentum by this massacre that they committed, gave a momentum once again to political Islamists and Islamists in general in the region to lead the public opinion. And as the Islamists stepped up to lead the public opinion, only very few voices in the region had the courage to challenge them. And I was one of these voices. Other two in Egypt actually were joining me. All of us are now pushed outside of the country, not because only the threats we received from the Islamists, but also because the Egyptian state and other Arab states decided to side with these Islamists against the liberal voices that are rejecting their narrative. Of course, this has to do with their weakness as dictators, with their bad economic performance that they need to compensate for by finding another role, like playing as champions of a big cause, like champions of the Palestinian cause, and so to distract the people from their own problems. But eventually, it only served the extremists. So I came here expecting that, okay, I left the bad guys behind. But unfortunately, what I found here is that the bad guys are already here. And they include many of the people I knew, like from 15 years ago or 20 years ago when I was a student, an undergraduate student. Now they are leading the protests that are happening all over the country. I know they are members of the Muslim Brotherhood, although many of them deny that they are. They even organize the protests in the same manner that they were doing back then, 15 and 20 years ago, the same way of mobilization, the same flags, the same narrative, even the same dependence on Al Jazeera footage and the news stories. So it's like a deja vu for me. Everything is happening, but in the United States. That's why I'm here today with the hope that we can find a way to prevent what happened to my home country, Egypt, from happening here to the United States. Because for me, the United States embodies all the important values that I've been fighting for all my life, including human rights, women's rights, and democratization. I don't want to see this going away by any means. So I hope today we can come up with an offensive strategy, as Zohdi said, that can help us make this happen before it's too late.
So Dalia, quick question for you. You've talked about how there was becoming more of this normalization between, say, Egypt and Israel. There was a more positive view that was becoming the norm. And then October 7th pushed that back. But do you think Islamists in Egypt and in, for instance, the other Arab states especially, are they on the decline overall in general, or are they now resurging and are they a significant force again?
They were on the decline already. And actually, I remember like 1 year ago, only 1 year ago, I wrote an article explaining why the legacy of the Muslim Brotherhood is fading. I called it the withering tree of the Muslim Brotherhood. Mm-hmm. And this was really what we're seeing. The Muslim Brotherhood became less powerful than they were before. People don't believe them anymore. Not all, like the biggest Arab states or the most key players in the Middle East are fighting against them. They were able to push them outside of the Middle East. But what happened on October 7, combined with, of course, like the bad economy in many Arab countries, the outrage in many Arab countries caused by also dictatorship and suffocating political environment, enabled these Islamists to find their way back to leading the public opinion again. So now, about 8 months after the October 7 and after the start of the war between Israel and Hamas, I believe they are gaining momentum and they are getting powerful again.
Okay, all right. So Hussain, I'll turn it over to you now. So if you could tell us a little bit about your own background and your thoughts on.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm not sure I can match Dalia, but I'll try. Well, I'll start with my personal story. I'm half Iraqi, half Lebanese, and I grew up in a relatively conservative, not crazy Shia family. And by the time I went to the American University of Beirut, I think exposure just made me reconsider the ideas that I grew up with. Now, mind you, in that part of the world, when you break with your tribe, you go left. Left is not only secular and not religious, but also Marxist and socialist and communist. So I went in that direction, and to me, it all sounded good and great. One more thing about that direction is that it also claims that it wants democracy. North Korea has the word democracy in its title, if you haven't noticed, or the Soviet Union too. So in my mind, this was secular democracy. Everyone is equal. What's there not to like? Now, on top of that, what we had at the time, my peers and myself going, was this huge conspiracy theory about the United States just running everything in the world. And if it's not the US, then it must be Israel. So for example, in Iraq, we thought that the US had installed Saddam to keep the Iraqis under its thumb and repressed and backward. And of course, the US sponsors the Gulf and sponsors everyone. And if you watch Arab media these days, you will see that almost everyone goes on Arabic TV channels. They'll say, yeah, of course, Bibi Netanyahu sponsored Hamas. He was just fattening the cow so that, he can just kill all of it. So these things are very common over there. Now, my time came, my eyes were opened when America said, okay, we're done with Saddam. We're coming to take him out. And as someone who was forced out of Iraq. My father is from Iraq, and we had to leave so that my dad wouldn't have to serve in the army, the military at the time in the war against Iran. So when we were forced to leave Iraq, and we hated Saddam for the longest time, just nothing political, just personal family hate against the guy. When America showed up and said, okay, now we're taking this guy out, and this was a great chance for democracy. What did all the leftist friends and peers and comrades and all the people were shouting together? Like these kids on college at the time at the American University of Beirut, I had a kufiya around my neck with a beard and a military pants, and we were just going for the thing, for the kill. So when America came to spread democracy, I thought, great, okay, now let's join the US. And what everybody else did was that they backed down and they switched. And now they switched the whole argument from fighting for democracy to countering imperialism. Now, all of a sudden, we had an issue with imperialism, and that didn't fly with me. And that was the beginning of my transformation from one side of perception to the other. And this is when I came here, and this was 20 years ago. And since then, I've been just supporting and endorsing and doing whatever I can to support democracy. And I got so invested in democracy in Iraq. I got so invested in the 2005 democracy revolution that ejected Assad's forces from Lebanon. I have friends, personal friends, who got assassinated both in Lebanon and Iraq for fighting the fight. The same thing happened with the Arab Spring. I just threw all my weight behind it. Now, after all of this, I have to say that I probably learned a few lessons. And the number one lesson is that democracy is great, but before we can get this society to cultivate the idea of liberty and the concept of liberty, it will not work. And this is the lesson that I took with me, that I still support democracy, but maybe we shouldn't start with the government. Maybe we should start much lower. So I'm here, and I'm supporting democracy, and I think of myself as leftist, and I come to the US, and where's the left? Someone who's a hijabi, like Ilhan Omar. So over here, things get just upside down in my mind. And over here I had to relearn everything. Now, the most important thing that I learned in this country is that whatever you see and hear from Arab Americans is totally different from what you see and hear from Arabs. These are two different organisms, even though they claim that they're one and the same, but they're not at all. And I think this probably started with someone with a high profile like Edward Said, the late professor at Columbia, who made it look as if he talked on behalf of Arabs, but he didn't. What you see on college campuses today is an American issue. Now, it's bad. Don't get me wrong. I support everyone in this room. This is a problem that we as Americans have to deal with. But this is not, what's going on over there. I mean, if these guys go over there, they wouldn't last a day. A guy who's a student in Columbia who's screaming Palestine and with a kufiya and a flag and standing there with his crop top, this does not fly over there. I'm sorry, it doesn't work, Yeah, exactly. It just doesn't work. I mean, all the ideas that they're putting out on campus, they've never tested them over there. And that's been the argument that we're having. So along these lines now, it's not only, and of course, I totally agree with Dalia, Palestine has been used since I was born as a tool of deflection. We can't govern, so let's throw this on someone else. And of course, Israel is here, and everyone hates the Jews anyway, so why not dump on them? So the point here is that I've been trying to argue with many people in the academic sector, not students. I'm not in a place that I can talk to students, but all the time we're having arguments with professors, with book authors, with friends like a friend Shadi Hamid, if people in this room know him, and I take the time and I try to be patient all the time, and I try to tell someone like Shadi, what you're saying does not represent the world over there. If we leave them to their devices, they will not get to democracy. If we pull out everything, if we dismantle Israel and pull out all the Jews and dismantle the US bases and just get out, it'll be one hell show of an ongoing bloody civil war, not only between Shia and Sunni and Sunni. The first massacre that Hamas committed when it took over the Gaza Strip in 2007 was against Fatah and the Palestinian Authority. And they killed 350,000 of these Palestinians. And there were no Jews involved at the time. So we have an issue of these people not realizing that what they have is bad for them. And then we have people over here who think that, well, it's cool over there. Let's import what they have over there and put it and install it here. And for some reason, I understand they're college kids. They're still young, not a lot of exposure. What I don't understand is that with these faculty, and especially faculty who, like a few of us over here who grew up over there, who know what's going on over there. They come here and they try to import the system that ejected them from there all the time. We left that part of the world because of the lack of liberty. And you come here and you practice the same thing that we had to run out away from. So this is my take about what's going on. I think this fight, I don't like to call it a fight, just let's call it a disagreement or an argument with these people, because sometimes fights goes all the way to us considering them being non-American and them doing the same. This is a line that I don't like to cross. But let's say this disagreement with these people is that we have to be patient and we have to keep on pushing. And of course, this is a battle in the media and then in schools. And my son goes to middle school, and this is something that we discuss every day. Every idea that he gets from school is the opposite of everything that I know and that he knows and that he gets exposed to. And when he goes to Lebanon in the summer, he sees things that are the opposite of what he's being told over here. So I'll stop here. And, yeah.
Hussain, so one thing that interests me about what you're saying is you mentioned that when you sort of left behind the orthodoxy of Islamists, if you want, you went to the Marxists. And to me, that's sort of a key thing, because where are the liberals? Here in Canada, traditionally liberal democracy is kind of a back and forth between what you might call conservatives and liberals. Some like the brake, some like the gas pedal, sort of the idea. What we're seeing so often here with the students and a lot of the radical academics is they come from that background, neo-Marxists from the critical theory schools of Marcuse. You have Foucault and Lyotard, the postmodernists, post-structuralists, neo-feminists like Judith Butler in gender theory. But it sounds, what we seem to be missing is, and what you have said too, is that liberal notion. And one of the other things that interests me about that is what I wrote about, of course, was an argument that said traditionally, historically, Islam has tended to be imperial. Then you have the more radical thinkers who've come in, like I said, the neo-Marxists, the post-Heideggerians, and imposed their ideology, which is really a Western concept, into that in the Middle East. But one of the things that is funny about me being attacked, for instance, by the National Council of Canadian Muslims, was their leader, Mustafa Farooq, had made some comments in the past that he tried to wipe out when he became CEO of the NCCM, where he said his goal was to build Cordova in Canada, the caliphate, obviously, different caliphates, but that was the one he was referring to. And he also said that he wanted to destroy the nation state, the Canadian nation state, these false boundaries of the nation state, which is where liberal democracy has sort of historically come from. So we have that on the one side, this sort of imperialist notion that he didn't want to admit. He didn't want to admit that Islam has had a very imperial past, especially because we have here in the West, students seem to be talking a lot about decolonizing. That's the idea. So the imperialist is only America, Europe, Israel. How do we get that? We've lost that middle, that liberal sort of conservative back and forth. Is there a possibility, for instance, in Lebanon or Iraq, to somehow rediscover that or bring that back? And even here, we've lost it here too.
Well, so there are 2 points. The first, the Marxist point, is that these people on college campuses, they call themselves Marxists. They're not Marxists at all.
No.
And the reason you know that is that someone like Bernie Sanders, who's an actual Marxist, he plays along, but so many times he tries to draw the line, but he's too populist.
Yeah.
So Marxism says that people are divided along classes, right? Mm-hmm. And this does not square with being divided along white versus black versus brown versus all these kind of people. If you're going by class, then you have, in this country, you have 2 white people living in poverty compared to every black person. I'm not talking percentages, I'm just talking in absolute terms. So Bernie Sanders is a Marxist. He didn't play along with when they discussed reparations to descendants of slaves. And then he had to walk it back a bit. So for this reason, and I never voted for Bernie, but he stands out and he tries to join them. So nothing of this is Marxist. On the Andalus part, and this is really interesting because now I see that the Prime Minister of Spain it probably be the first country that will recognize the state of Palestine as as a sovereign state or whatever they call it. Qatar, which is the sponsor of almost everything that we see, and in terms of Islamism. And I have Al Jazeera running, Al Jazeera Arabic, I have it running all day long in the background. Qatar has this movement that they call the revival of the Moriscos. And these are the Muslims who were kicked out and forced to convert to Christianity. So these guys are now switching or converting back to Islam. And these guys accuse the Spanish government of being the northern colonizers of Al-Andalus that's Muslim and Arab. And now there's a movement headed by a lady called Adiba Ramirez, who's also the who's the director of the National Library in Doha, Qatar. And Adiba's leading this movement wherein they have the big keys to the old houses, and some of them even have their doors taken away when they left from Al-Andalus to Morocco. And now this movement is growing, and they want to, and by the way, for those who don't know, the Israeli thing is that a big chunk of Palestinians claim to have keys from 1948 that they plan to use. This is the exact same story that's being repeated with Al-Andalus. So now you have the exact same story that's being replayed, but instead of Palestinians versus Jews and Israelis, this is the Arabs of Al-Andalus versus Spain. And here you go and you look at the Prime Minister of Spain and say, yes, I like Hamas. And say, well, good luck then.
Exactly, yeah. So, Asra, now we'll turn it over to you. I know you want to talk a little bit about your experience as well, and especially what you've seen here in the U.S.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for these. Let me see. Is this on okay? Is it? Yes, it's
Yeah,
okay. Yes, I'm so happy for your testimonial. So sorry for your experience. But like many in America are realizing, you have to feel it personally to believe. And so thank you to both of you also for your amazing testimonials. I feel so moved also hearing them because they really resonate with me in terms of the journey that my family has made. And in our story, I want to hopefully tell you the journey of this creation that I've called Woke Army, that is an illustration from Egypt to Lebanon to my native country of India, and throughout the world, of this nexus of the leftists with the Islamists, this unholy alliance that we talk about today. How could two institutions and two ideologies with so many contradictions come together? So I want to show that really in my lifetime is how it happened. After the Muslim Brotherhood was created in 1924 in Egypt, as many of you know, Muslim Brotherhood legacy organizations and organizations emerged. In my native India, a man by the name of Maulana Maududi had a bicycle and a little storefront in which he would teach his Islam. And my father, a man who lived through British colonialism, remembers driving through that storefront as a child. And in that storefront, Maulana Maududi was teaching the newly imported ideas of the Muslim Brotherhood and creating an organization that then grew through South Asia and captured the minds of many of my family members, even though we were growing up with a very secular interpretation of Islam. He moved to Pakistan with 1947 with his ideas, and in Lebanon, this organization called Hizb ut-Tahrir was created that also had these same extremist ideas. And across the world, they were emerging with names that I sometimes call an alphabet soup, you know? And what is it that happened in the United States then, that then took root in Canada? These young men, mostly men, arrived, much like my father, to take root here in America, just like you did, in the belief of this system. But my father was departed from them, these young men that he started meeting as a college student in the 1960s, because he is a Muslim, but he believed in secular Islam. He did not believe in this caliphate vision that the Muslim Brotherhood had been preaching. And so my dad went from Rutgers University to West Virginia University and created mosques, and started these organizations called Muslim Students Associations. But he always had a line in the interpretation of Islam that he accepted. They would say that a Shia could not lead the Sunnis in prayer. And he said, that's not my Islam. That's not the Islam of his interpretation. And what we know now is that these organizations took root in a parcel of land not far from where I live today, Northern Virginia, at an address called 500 Grove Street in Herndon, Virginia, in the early 1980s. And there they created an institute of Islamic thought. Yeah. The IT is how it's called. And slowly they were growing and growing and growing. And they had with them this imagination, this battle plan like Dalia was talking about, by any means necessary to take root in the United States. So what was happening in our Muslim world at the same time? This Quran was being exported. What is this Quran? It's the noble Quran. Who was it being exported by? The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I was a little girl growing up in Morgantown, West Virginia, and this Quran arrived at our mosque that my father had started. And what had they done? They had added into the first chapter, first verse, and this is why you know that I'm a Muslim reformer, because did I do my wuzu before I opened the Quran? No. Am I wearing my headscarf? No. And these are the rules that I refuse. The way that we know this first chapter and verse is guide us to the straight way, the way of those on whom you have bestowed your grace, not the way of those who've earned your anger. That's all it says. Is there mention of the Yahudi in there? The Jew? No. But in this Quran, they added, in parentheses, not the way of those who've earned your anger. What does it say?
Such as the Jews.
Right. And then who else do they add?
Such as the Christians.
Such as the Christians, yeah. Yeah.
So they added this into ideology, right? They added hate into our Islam. And what was happening at the same time? This is our quote Bible, right?
Yeah.
And then this became the Bible. This Saudi interpretation became the Salafi, the whatever you want to call it, of hate.
Yeah.
What was happening in America concurrently? Another Bible was emerging.
Oh.
It's one that many of you may not have ever seen, but it is called Critical Race Theory. It's a compendium, in law you know it, of the idea that our institutions are racist, that everything must be looked at through the lens of race. And I, as a, quote, woman of color, right, to borrow their terms, all of us as human beings, do we all refuse the idea of a hierarchy of human value? Do we refuse it? We refuse it.
Of course.
We believe in equality and human rights. We understand racism exists, right? But we do not replace one hierarchy of human rights with another hierarchy of human rights. And that is the problem with this ideology, and that is the problem with the ideology of the Islamists. They impose a new hierarchy of human rights. And how have they merged now? How can these two seemingly contradictory or perhaps not parallel ideas emerge together today? Well, what we see now is one of those organizations from the alphabet soup. What is it? What's the little 4 letters here? I'm so sorry, this keeps moving. What are the 4 letters? And what does CARE stand for?
Council for
American Islamic
Relations.
Council of American Islamic Radicalization.
Radicalization, yeah, right.
Council on American Islamic Relations. Little letters. I'm going to take you to the little letters. What are they calling for? Muslims for what? Racial justice. So what they are doing is they are appropriating the lens of race. Yeah. Why is it that Colin was called a racist? Why was he called a racist? Because we are Muslims. We are not a race. We are not a race. We are many racial identities. But they adapted the beautiful lens of civil rights and race in order to then hijack America through this Trojan horse. And how does it manifest itself? Who doesn't love the Statue of Liberty? What did they do? They put the Statue of Liberty beside the woman with the headscarf, which is not a crime by any means, of course, right, Dalia? But you do not believe in it as forced. You do not believe that every woman is required to wear it. It is our choice if we do or if we do not want to wear it. But this then becomes their image of the Muslim. And what is that image? That is the Islamist image, right? And what they do is they appropriate all of those ideas that you believed in as a young man, that I believed in as a classic liberal, you know? And so who did they do that with? They did it, unfortunately, in the United States of America with the Democratic Party. They entered democratic politics. And this is just, the sign says what? No war with Iran. When did this emerge? It was during the Obama administration when President Obama was in talks, and unfortunately in Egypt working with the Muslim Brotherhood, and then in Iran working with the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I want you to look again, always have to look at the small print. What does the small print say?
Move on.
Civic action.
Good. And right above it?
Move on. .org.
MoveOn.org. What is MoveOn.org? Right? You don't know, right?
No.
MoveOn.org was created after President Bill Clinton had a little problem in the White House, a little scandal. And the Democratic of an affair with Monica Lewinsky. And the MoveOn.org was created by Democrats who said, MoveOn.org. We want to move on because it was a blemish, right, on their party, liberalism. But who is now aligned with the Islamic Republic of Iran, their sectarianism, their ideology of oppression, but the liberal organization in the United States, representing democratic interests? And how do they continue to manifest? Groups like this. What does the small print say? Code Pink.
Code Pink.
Code Pink, a quote, peace activist organization, right? Created to fight war. And where do they do their spring trips? To Iran and to Gaza. So they become a manifestation of the quote, white woman nexus with the Islamists. And they express themselves in the United States not only in radical politics, but in ordinary politics like the Women's March that ends up becoming a nexus, again, of the Islamists and the leftists with individuals like the activist Linda Sarsour, who refused to allow Israeli feminists to join the Women's March in the United States. And so the final leg of this is today. The final leg is the signs that we see today. And there are a few that I want to just have illustrate what we are up against. These are the slick signs of that alphabet soup of the Muslim Brothers. What do they ask for? Resistance is justified, right? When this is the language, when people are occupied. The U.S. Palestinian Community Network, funded in part through that network at 500 Grove Street. They bring the chance. These are slick posters, right? This is not ordinary grassroots from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. And this is the ultimate nexus today. These are the three signs that we see everywhere, all the time. The black and white signs. Stand with Palestine. You can see it in big letters. What does it say in the small print?
Party for Socialism and Liberation.
Party for Socialism and Liberation. These are the folks who on their YouTube channel go to China and come back and tell us how amazing it is in China. They do field trips to North Korea and they come back with just stories of glory from that trip. Another group. When you go to the QR code, it takes you to an organization called Answer Coalition. And that is another one of those far left groups fueling these protests today with those Muslim brothers, I call them, because they don't self-describe as Muslim Brotherhood. So to be fair, I just call them the Muslim Brothers. And these are the groups that are now on our streets. They are practicing this Saul Alinsky's book of Rules for Radicals. They have taken over our streets with the idea that their agitation operations is a legitimate form of resistance to the occupation of the white supremacists using the race lens again to hijack this debate of the Jews, and to create the Jews low. You talked about school boards, and I want to just close with these couple examples because I'm a mother. I was born in India and grew up here believing that my son and the children of this generation would manifest these common sense ideas that we have for the dignity of a state to exist, for human rights and women's rights. But what has happened now is that the Islamists and the leftists have come together into our school systems with books like this one, Woke Baby, for children. Yeah, cardboard books that entered these big ideas. Yeah. So you were right to want to be able to know how to speak to the school boards as we also speak to Congress. And my heart feels for you as a young father of young children, because they are the ones whose brains and minds we must inspire to critically think and connect the dots about these small ideas. And this is the ultimate contradiction that the leftists and the Islamists are also facing, together with gay BCs and bye-bye binary. And this is where the fault line lies, right? because this is where the Islamists departed from the leftists in some major protests in Canada and the United States. We have to find those fault lines. You know, we are people who believe in the equal rights of all people, and we know that the Islamists do not believe in that. You know, we are the ones who are actually the living manifestation of ideas of liberty and women's rights and courage and free speech. We practice it every day, and we know within our communities, we all know that the Islamists are the enemy of all of those ideas. And these leftists have gotten in bed, just like they have in revolutions in Iran and in other places around the world, with people who will murder them eventually. And so what I hope is that over this next day or two, we will come up with the ways, just like we have wanted to do, to dismantle this woke army and do it with the positive messages and narratives that you all have captured in both your lives and in your work. So thank you.
Thank you, Asra.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that you mentioned, and which I was interviewed by a fellow in Canada who brought this point out exactly, was that not only was I called Islamophobic, but I was called racist. So they add that on. Now, one of the things, although the people on the left who attacked me knew this, but one of the things that eventually came out was that I was also the first openly gay man appointed as chief of the Alberta Human Rights Commission. And you would have thought the left would be somewhat sympathetic to that. Instead, it was turned against me as again being, well, you know, you can be gay and Islamophobic, or you can, a professor of women's and gender studies at the University of Alberta, distinguished professor, publicly said about me, well, you can be gay and intemperate, which is somewhat of a homophobic trope.
Right.
You know, oh, you're effeminate or flighty, or you're not serious. Right. And she said, and you can be not suited to this role. Also, they didn't know, because my partner and I kept it very quiet, that he and I had rescued a Jordanian man who had HIV. He'd been working in UAE. He had a blood test done. He was discovered, and he was sent back to Jordan, and his family was going to kill him. So we got him out, got him asylum in Calgary. We did that under the radar. But you know what I found then that was happening was they were using and manipulating those categories against me, even though these are things that would have normally been, the left would have applauded.
Right.
So do you have any thoughts on about how that happens and why that's happening?
Yeah, you know, it's this concept of intersectionalism weaponized, right? And so what happens in this new hierarchy of human values is that they have a pecking order. And so if you as a gay man, you are above a straight man, right? And then if you were transgender, it'd be even better. And then, but right now, the highest value in all of that is that we must be anti-Israel. So everything else is negated. You know, I entered into my own work fighting for Muslim women's rights and went to the Council on American Islamic Relations for assistance because I thought that they were advocating for civil rights. And they told me literally, Ibrahim Hooper, no, we are fighting for American Islamic relations, not Islamic relations. So even when we are fighting for the right, you know, you're looking for the dignity of a man of Muslim origin, of people to be free for their choices in a Muslim country, you think that would be high, right, among the liberals, but then, and the far left, let's say. But what happens is they end up bringing us down different pecking order. And unfortunately, your identity, you know, I like to exploit it. Like I definitely use it against them, but ultimately they do not care, you know. And And we can never win that game.
Yeah.
We can never win. My mother told me 20 years ago, and I didn't listen to her, they will never change, you know, and they will just use their own jujitsu to negate and discredit us for whatever belief we have because we do not agree with them. That is, right now it's Israel. Tomorrow they're going to claim right of return to Kashmir. You know, they will continue in this, as in Spain, you know, like they will continue, and as long as we're not with them, they will see us as their enemy, and we will never win in their identity politics.
And it seems to me right now that the category of decolonizing, like you said, it's becoming popular in Spain. Now they're using it against the Spanish. It's also a way for them to intersect, if you will, with indigenous people in North America, South America. It seems that's their category that is the most abstract. It's not, there's no real person who fits into the pure intersectionally perfected type of individual, but decolonization seems to be the one that they can catch everything under and throw it out. And that seems to be a connection between Islamists who are, as I said, you know, because I actually wrote that Islam has a history of being imperial, I had to be canceled. I had to be wiped out because their category seems to be, they want to use that category as their own weapon.
Whereas they are colonizers.
Right.
They're colonizers of land and minds.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I guess we can open it up to questions now and see if anybody, oh, there we go. I think there's a microphone even coming. Oh, right here.
Thank you. I have a question for Dalia, actually. You know, first of all, your story is amazing and your understanding is very good. The question, of course, that I have is, you know, how come we can't replicate this? How come we can't replicate you?
Oh, wow. Thank
You know, in these, you know, and I'm coming obviously from, you know, yes, the Jewish world and seeing it from our lens, I guess, in a way, saying, okay, how come we can't create more understanding? What are the attributes that you have that have caused you to be who you are? And then if we distill that and if we figure that out, maybe somehow we can replicate, you know, another 50 million, 100 million, you know what I'm saying? How do we do, and it's just, I'm using you as an example, but I think everybody understands what I'm saying here, that there are others like you. So how do we, and obviously we're seeing them on stage, and obviously they're in this room, so how do we duplicate this?
Thank you, Avi. Actually, it's thank you. I feel flattered. Thank you. It's good question. Also, it's very important. But I would like to tell you something. Like at the same time, after I condemned Hamas and was forced to leave Egypt, after that, as a result of my statement, like my public political opinion, I was receiving many death threats, of course. But at the same time, I was receiving messages from people like myself, young Arabs, young Muslims, young Egyptians, who some of them are Muslims, some of them are Christians, who are applauding me for what I did. And they said, like, we wish we have the courage just to go out and speak up as you did, but we are scared because we have families, we have education, we want to complete. So these people exist. Like, there are many people like me who exist, but the issue is that they are not empowered. And one of the things I've always been speaking about for years and years is that there are many liberal people in the Arab world, really, many liberals, and many liberal Muslims, many secular Muslims, I would say, if this is a correct term, many who are reformists in their thoughts. But the issue is that we are not as well organized as the bad people are, as the extremists are. Very well funded, very well organized. They are even, when you go to the protests, I went to some of the protests that are happening here in the United States. You will see there are people behind the scenes giving them instructions on what to do, how to speak to the policemen, how to speak to the media, what to do when this and that happens, what to do when you're in this situation. So there is a force behind them that's empowering them to do what they are doing. But we want to be on the forefront too, but we don't have this force behind us, unfortunately. So I hope, like through the work we're doing here, we can find a way to unify moderate Muslims, liberal Arabs together in one place and give them this power. And I think the effort made by people like Rahil here is one of these great things. You have been doing this for so long and trying to do that, but I'm sure you've also been faced by the same problems that I'm speaking about, is that really to back
no proper
the work
funding,
you're doing, no many people who...
Let me just add one thing. In addition to what Dalia said, there's the issue of physical security. And this is, and I should lend you my WhatsApp and you can just go through it. And there are dozens and dozens of people say, we agree, but we can't press like. And it's not only because of social shaming or the lack of funding, or there's actual physical threat to you. My personal friend, Luqman Slim, was killed in February 2021. He was a Shia who was against Hezbollah in Lebanon. They shot him. Now, have you ever heard of him in this room? Probably not. Have you ever heard of Khashoggi and Shireen Abu Akleh? Of course, yes. And in the case of both Khashoggi and Shireen Abu Akleh, they were connected to Qatar Foundation, Al Jazeera, and so President Biden raised hell over both these characters. But when it came to Luqman Slim, Blinken issued a statement in which he said, we asked the Lebanese justice to bring the perpetrators to justice. Really? We were asking the Lebanese justice to do that? And that was it. That was the end of it. So this issue, I mean, and I raise this issue all the time in this town. I say, if my physical security was not threatened, I'd go to my hometown of Baalbek, where Hezbollah was founded in Lebanon, stand in the middle of the square and just shout out loud, I want peace with Israel tomorrow. And by tomorrow, I mean yesterday. But, you know, I mean, I can last probably 10 minutes and then taken out.